Hello viewers, and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. I'm your host Chef Andy, and today we are going to be going Tex-Mex with a dish. We're going to be bringing a beautifully Mexican inspired dish to the table today, which is to mention we're going to be making a burrito. Now before we begin, I'll of course introduce the ingredients before us just to give you an idea of what to expect for this recipe. Now from the very front, you'll require 1 stock cube and 1 teaspoon of oregano. You'll also require some garlic cloves and 1 tablespoon of some tomato paste. You'll also require some stock powder and some salt, 1 regular size red onion, about a 3/4 cup of some red beans, about half a cabbage. You'll also require about 2 sprigs of some spring onion, about 1 cup of some all-purpose flour, some peppercorns to crush, some oil to cook with, and last but not least, some cold water to make your dough in. But before we begin, a small break, and we'll see you after a short one. Welcome back viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we're going to be working on a Tex-Mex dish. To be more simple, I'm going to be working on a Mexican infused dish for this recipe. Now, one thing you definitely need to remember, you are going to be working with some raw beans. So very important to always make sure that you do have this batch that's already, you should actually soak your beans overnight. Of course, if you're going to be cooking them a little earlier in time, but of course if you do have a bit of time available to you, you can of course cook this to order, cool them off very briefly, and finish off your burrito, which is a technique we're going to be working with today. Now to start us off, very simply, begin by sifting some flour into a bowl. Proceed to shake your sieve right up until your flour is completely sifted. Next up, we're going to proceed to season that with a pinch of salt and some oregano. Use your fingers, of course, to work your dough, or rather work your flour mixture right up until you've got your oregano and your salt fairly mixed through. And once done, proceed to make a well at the base of your bowl, to which you will proceed to add some cold water. So I'm going to add about 1/4 cup. And very importantly, about a tablespoon of some oil. Once that's done, begin to fold from the sides, of course using a finger to work your well towards the center of the bowl. And of course covering up the water with the flour. And once done, proceed to use your fingertips to work the dough. Add in a bit more flour if your mixture is still runny. And continue to mix in the same pattern, incorporating small bits of flour to your mixture. And of course, do take time as well to work around your bowl, and you can achieve this very simply by turning your bowl around as you mix. Dust over some flour, and you can basically use the outer part of your fingers to literally just rub the flour along the sides of your bowl. And what you will begin to notice is your dough will consistently just proceed to reduce from the sides, and of course assist you in coming up with that one final dough mixture. You can of course continue to add a little bit of flour at a time, but of course be sure to make sure not to add too much at once, else you will probably have a very dry mixture. So at this stage your dough is actually starting to constitute. Begin this process now by rubbing some flour on the inner side of your palms, through your fingers, and proceed to do so right up until your hands are almost clean. And proceed to work your dough within the bowl, adding flour little by little, of course, right up until you have a completely clean bottom. So this should actually make it very, very easy, especially if you're working with a glass bowl. Remember, these are particularly very, very beautiful, especially when working with flour. For one, they don't actually conduct any heat through the process. And second of all, you can also be able to see right through the bowl. And you can, of course, be able to also pull out any unwanted debris that could actually fall into your bowl. So finish off by dusting very lightly over the top. Proceed to reconstitute your tortilla wrap. Dust once more over the top. And you can start to knock down your dough very, very gently. And once you have it to about 5 to 6 centimeters wide, you can proceed to stop at that point. Once more rubbing the flour against your fingertips, making sure, of course, to not waste any of your mixture. And very, very simply, right after that, proceed to grab a cloth of your choice. Dump it very, very briefly under some cold running water. But be sure to make sure that once you wring the cloth, there should almost be no water dripping through. And all you're going to do at this stage is cover your tortilla and allow your dough to rest very, very briefly undisturbed for about 10 to 15 minutes. And you can, of course, complete the process by rolling it out and cooking it onto a pan. Now, before we proceed, very important to also make sure that you get your beans on the go at this stage. So very, very simple technique. Into the pot of choice that you'll be using, proceed to add your beans into the pot and proceed to cover with about 3 times the level of water to your beans. Once that is done, we're going to proceed to move this onto the burner. And we're going to allow that to continue to cook at high heat right up until the beans are completely tender, and which of course will call for us to cool them off very briefly under cold running water and proceed to cook off for the filling. But before we do so, we are going to allow that to continue boiling for a few minutes, basically giving us quite a bit of time. And of course, we'll allow you to take a break in the meantime. But when we do come back, I will of course show you what they look like. We'll of course take them out of the water, rinse them, and proceed with the next part of the cooking process. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we basically worked on a very simple tortilla dough here, which is about to go. We've also been boiling some beans already, and they've probably gone for about 20 minutes. We're going to allow that for about another 10 minutes to cook fully, and then we'll of course proceed to the last and final part of the dish. But for now, we're going to unfold this beautiful mixture. And we're going to Reconstitute it while in the bowl. Very important to do so, just to make sure not to lose out on any of the flour that's inside or to waste any of it. Proceed to move it onto the palm of your hand. And at this stage, you can discard your mixing bowl. Proceed to dust your working surface with some flour. And to that, we're going to proceed to divide that into 2 pieces. Once more, very importantly, reconstitute your dough back to shape. Do the same for the second piece. Right, once done, proceed to grab a rolling pin, and we're going to proceed to roll out the dough, making of course sure that your pan is already on the heat. Now very simply, by dusting over some flour and around your tortilla wrap, proceed to roll that out on the surface of your working table, making sure to turn over continuously as you roll your dough. Now also to mention, tortillas are very, very big in Mexico. They actually form a very, very good additional substitute for starch. And on this particular part of the continent, which is Kenya, we're also very, very fond of having wheat products as particular substitutes for starch to our meals. So this particular one is very, very common to some of us, especially those of you who may have eaten out and had Mexican. But of course, for the local guy that pretty much is looking for something fancy to come up with, especially with 2 ingredients, which is chapati and beans, it is particularly a very common staple. Of course, we do it a little different here. We'd probably stew our beans and serve the chapati on the side. Now for this particular technique, you'll of course be able to learn how to incorporate your chapati and your beans into one particular dish. So just to finish this off, proceed to roll that out until it's very, very thin. Remember, you'll of course need to roll this out, so very important to make sure that the thickness and consistency is quite right from the point that you start rolling. And of course, don't be biased with the size. You can of course go as large as your dough allows you to, of course, or rather as big as your pan will allow you to. And we can keep rolling that out. Of course, making sure to get as much symmetry as you possibly can. Right, I can see my pan is now smoking hot. We'll allow that just a few seconds to cool off. On the side of the heat. And one thing also to mention, be sure to be very, very cautious when making your tortillas. Remember, quite a bit of high heat will of course result in drying out your tortilla completely and completely eradicating any chances of you being able to roll it out. So be very, very vigilant to make sure to always reheat your pan first. Allow it to cool off very, very slightly, and you can proceed to cook your first piece. So proceed to move that onto your hot pan. And as you can see from the cameras, quite a big size tortilla we're making today. And while that continues for its first process of cooking, which should be about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes, proceed to roll out your second piece. Making sure, of course, to dust thoroughly as to enable for your tortilla to not stick to your rolling pin. Dust your surface once more. Of course, being very, very wary about your pan. And also to mention, you should be making your tortillas at the lowest possible temperature. This is of course because of two reasons. You are actually trying to cook it through, and you of course don't need any particular color at this stage. So this should almost feel like an undone chapati at this stage. Proceed to turn that over and just finish off by rolling your second piece. Dust your surface one last time. And proceed to turn your chapati over a few more times while you of course proceed to roll it out. Right about towards the finish of your second piece. Your first piece should be ready by this stage. So proceed to grab a plate of choice, and you can proceed to remove that from the heat and allow that to proceed to cool off very gently at the back, and proceed to do the same thing as you did for the first piece with the second one. Of course, once more, always trying to make sure to get the biggest possible size out of it. Remember, this will of course shrink once you lift it off the countertop. Once it's nice and big, proceed to move that onto the pan once more and allow that to continue for the first process of cooking, which will of course take us to the first break. So we are going to take a break now, allowing us to set up our station and come back to you. But before we do, I will of course mention that the beans are almost fully cooked now, so we're going to also turn that off from the heat completely and just allow the pot to come back to its cooling state. We are also going to finish off the tortillas, but when we do come back, I'll take you through the process of finishing off the beans, and we can skip to the last and final part, which is folding the tortilla wrap. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've pretty much done a chunk of the preparation for this dish. Now I'm of course going to move you to the next step of the dish, which is the beans. These are already parboiled, so we're going to begin by draining this right next to the sink. Be sure to give those a quick shake, and of course you can also rinse with some cold water if you have of course cooked them without firstly washing them or soaking them. So you can give that a shake and allow for the excess liquid to drain. And you can now allow that to drain very slowly and undisturbed on the side, giving you a bit of time to proceed to begin the preparation of the rest of your ingredients. So to this process, always begin by heating up your pan that you'll be cooking in and adjust that to very low. Begin your process by peeling your red onion. Making sure of course to separate the skins from the onion that you're going to be using. And proceed to discard the rest. Now next up, begin the process by slicing your onion through the center. Once that's done, proceed to chop that very finely, beginning by slicing from the top. Turn that sideways and slice once almost right through, and proceed to just chop finely as usual. Finish your first piece and very, very briefly proceed to the next. And finish off once more by finishing off the bulb end of your onion. And you can of course run your knife right through once more, just to make sure that you've got your size intact. And once that's done, we're going to proceed to begin our frying process by adding about a tablespoon of some cooking oil. And of course proceed to add your onions. So very important to always hear that sound, especially when you're going to be cooking. Very important to make sure that you get the extreme amount of flavor from your dish. And by this I would mean allowing your onions to actually sweat out their juices. Thereafter, of course, giving a nice infusion to your dish. You can now raise your temperature a little higher. Right, as your onions continue, we're also going to be adding to that some finely chopped leek. So I'm going to begin by slicing that stem of leek into 4 equal pieces and proceed to shred that very finely. And one beautiful addition to adding leeks to your beans, gives it a nice, beautiful all-round flavor. Also gives it that beautiful finish of a buttery effect, somewhat similar to what you'd feel especially when you're cooking with butter. And proceed to add that to your pan and mix through once more. And now once your onions are almost fragrant and translucent, we'll proceed to incorporate the rest of our ingredients, of course beginning with the garlic. So smash that on your counter, makes it very, very easy to peel your garlic. And proceed to do the same with the second and third piece. Right, once those are done, discard the skin and you can proceed to chop your garlic very, very briefly. Right, so that's coarsely chopped. Proceed to add that to your onion mix. And remember, one particular important tip to share with you, especially when sweating out your onions, be sure to always regulate the heat, hence you will actually overcolor your mixture too quickly. Right, once your onions are sweated out, we're going to proceed to saute our beans in there as well. Proceed to mix that through. And all we're doing at this stage is just allowing the beans to grasp the flavor of the onions. And once that's done, proceed to add in a teaspoon of your tomato paste. And what this does is it basically gets rid of that acidity of the beans, allowing you to have a nice, beautiful flavor right through from the beginning of your dish. Now remember, this is particularly not to be served saucy. It should actually be a little dry and still yet fragrant. So once you have your paste almost completely consumed, you can drizzle over just a little bit of oil once more and mix your beans through, of course making sure to do so at low heat in order to not overcook or overcolor your mixture. And now, using the same container you used to weigh out your tomato paste, measure out about the same amount quantity of water. Also be sure to just give that a mix right around the sides, making sure to not waste any of your paste. And proceed to add that to your pot. And we're basically going to allow that to continue simmering for anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. But be sure to give it a nice thorough mix, making sure that your tomato paste is completely dissolved in the mixture. And you can finish that off by leveling your beans to the surface of the pot. And you can allow that to continue cooking very, very gently. Now, in the meantime, we also have some cabbage which we're going to be using to stuff our burrito. So I'm going to begin by removing this very hard outer skin layer. Also reduce the stem. And all you're going to do is proceed to shred your cabbage. And of course, it's very, very easy to do so with a very sharp knife. All you need to do is hold your cabbage upright to a position you're comfortable to chop in. And just proceed to go right around the edges. Of course, always avoiding that heart center, because that is going to be particularly hard to chew and to consume. So what you're looking for is just very, very fine shredded cabbage from the outer, more leafy part of the cabbage. And remember, even when you still have the heart remaining, you can always proceed to add that into your stock pot. And you can proceed to make some vegetable stock with it. Now, coming up to almost about half a cup of some shredded cabbage, you can proceed to stop. And you can now grab the rest of your leek, which you can begin by slicing into half. We're going to be using the more leafy part of the leek. So I'm going to slice that into half. And by pressing that hard against the board, you should actually be able to spread it out a little more better to be able to julienne. Proceed to do the same with the other half. And you can of course also do so by unleafing your piece of leek into one piece, or rather single pieces. And you can also proceed to do the same for the rest of your leek. Simple as that. Once done, you can move that into a bowl. And you can of course dress that with a little bit of some oil. Flavor it as well with a little bit of some salt. And just give that a mix. And what happens is this, we're basically going to be using alongside the beans to stuff our tortilla. And just for a little bit of a crispness and bite, crush over some black peppercorns. And you can proceed to mix that through. And you can allow that to sit right up until you're ready to plate. Now, just to bring your focus back to the beans, I'm going to give that a mix once more. And particularly when making burritos, very important to make sure that your beans are nicely fragrant and they're also very soft. So I'm going to take out about 2 pieces and lay them on the board. And all you need to do at this stage is press the tip of your knife over, and by pressing your finger, it should actually mash very, very easily. Of course, giving you a sign that your beans are now ready to come out of the heat. But before we do so, very important to give that a nice, beautiful kick of flavor. So remember as well, very hard to actually dilute any seasoning to cooking dishes, so very important to always use a bit of water to do so. So to that, I'm going to incorporate 1 teaspoon of my stock powder. Mix that very, very gently. And of course, always scoop around the base, making sure that you don't have any residue still left over at the bottom. And to that, we're also going to incorporate about half a stock cube. So you can just slice that in half and use that half that you already have. Break that down with a spoon as well by pressing very, very gently towards the base of your container or your cup. And work your spoon right around the sides of your dish. And that should allow for you to pretty much get those granules to dissolve a little faster into your beans mixture. But very importantly, always have a sieve to aid you in making sure that you don't actually have any insoluble granules going into your dish. And now all you need to do is proceed to mix that through. And continue to do the same right up until your liquid is completely dissolved. And that, of course, brings you to the last bit of preparation for your beans. Now, these are particularly now ready to serve, so we're going to turn that off. And what we're going to do now is proceed to the assembly part of the dish. So, by quickly giving your surface a wipe, you can proceed to grab your tortillas. Now, one particular trick to share as well, especially to keep your tortillas nice and moist, you can always use a bit of some kitchen towel, or of course you can also use the same towel that you use to cover the dough. You can place that right over the top, and this will of course slow down the drying process of your tortilla wraps. And what we're going to do is we're going to proceed to plate just one of the pieces for you to be able to see. So I'm just going to place the plate right in front of you. Very simply, as I mentioned, very important to have some aluminium foil for this dish. So begin the process by rolling out your aluminium right over your surface or on top of a board, and proceed to lay your tortilla wrap in the center. You can now proceed to scoop your beans to the center of your tortilla wrap, spooning just enough to be able to contain. So about 3 heaped cooking spoonfuls should do for this. Just going to add about another half. Right, very, very simply, all you need to do now is proceed to roll this out. So always have the beans almost sitting horizontally right in front of you, and of course right on top of the tortilla wrap with the aluminium sitting right underneath. And very, very simply, all you need to do is first of all fold over your tortilla and use your fingertips to just tuck the beans right back towards the center of your wrap. And once you've got that little bit of room remaining, you can now proceed to fold that over. Of course, making sure that the open flap is of course facing you at this stage. And all you need to do at this stage now is slide your tortilla almost a third away from the center. And very, very importantly, begin by tucking and pulling back from the aluminium foil to make sure that you get a nice, beautifully wrapped and tightly wrapped burrito. And you can proceed to go right over. And once you've got your flap completely covered, very, very simply begin by pressing the sides down. And you can also give that a squeeze, and what this does is it actually allows for you to push the beans right back into your burrito mixture. You can of course also open it up very, very briefly and proceed to stuff your beans from the sides, of course making sure not to touch the food by hand. And all you need to do now is roll that over about twice. And you can of course make sure to not waste any more of that aluminum foil, and you can slice any excess of that off at this stage. And you can always use that elsewhere in the kitchen. Right now, very importantly, before you actually finish wrapping this off, be sure to almost pinch the ends of your burrito. Remember, your filling is now all towards the center. So you're basically just pinching that in to make sure that everything is completely held together. Proceed to roll that over. And all you need to do is begin by twisting one end of your burrito. And you can just fold that in like that. And of course you can hold it up, and by giving it a bit of a knock, that actually allows for everything to settle in nice and easy. Proceed to also twist the other end of your burrito wrap, and you can twist in to lock that nice and gently. And you can of course be able to store that in your refrigerator up to overnight, or maybe even 2 to 3 days. But of course be sure to make sure that when you reheat that in the microwave, be very, very wary that it could actually spark a fire if you used aluminum in your microwave. So you may actually want to open that up, reheat it, and probably roll that before you proceed to consumption. Now once that's done, very, very simply, just for presentation, I'm going to hold my knife almost diagonally right over the aluminum, and you can proceed to slice very, very gently. And of course, by taking quite a bit of precaution doing so, you will of course ensure that you don't actually have any aluminum stuck inside your dish. And of course you also get a very, very clean cut. Now once that's done, you can pretty much open those up and place them on your plate. And that of course is my very, very simple version of a homemade burrito, and of course stuffed with some homemade beans. I do hope you've had some fun on the show today. And of course, this is of course not finished. You can of course add a bit of a garnish to that, and you can as well also always fill that in. But remember, the traditional way of making a burrito is always have just the beans inside. There is also alternatives to serve that with a bit of some grated cheddar cheese, a bit of some tomato salsa, or even some sweet corn, and that will of course complement your dish quite well. But since we're going to be using just the cabbage, I'm going to proceed to spoon that onto the plate. And what that does, it actually gives a nice refreshing crunch to that soggy burrito. Of course, giving you a nice, beautiful, light and hearty meal for your dinner. I do thank you once again for tuning in this far. I do hope you've managed to pick up something new from the show today. And I'm also hoping that you will actually give a try on this and pretty much send us the recipe, your recipe, or even the photos of your dish once it's complete. We're always more than happy to see some progressive feedback. Now we have come to the last and final part of the show, where I will bid you farewell. I will also continue to bring some very, very inspirational dishes, particularly on the chapati dish. And of course, you can be able to tune into our YouTube channel, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya, where you can be able to recap on this and many more dishes that you may have missed out in the recent past. So I do thank you once again for making time to join us, and until the next episode, do have a splendid night, and we'll see you soon.